We may have been separated by a great landmass from the actual impact of 9/11/2001. We felt it in our hearts, but of course we're separated from the East Coast by a great many miles. We are not separated from the beginning of the response that took place militarily here in the Black Hills. And there are many people in this room who probably remember a certain overnight deployment that took place from Ellsworth, one of the many that have taken place since that day. But I particularly remember the first one, when the sorties came at about every 10 to 15 minutes for 3 hours out at Ellsworth Air Force Base as the beginnings of America's military response took place out there. We're privileged to have with us today a man who was actually commanded the 28th Bomb Wing at Ellsworth Air Force Base, and who can tell us a great deal about the military impacts and what the military response entailed in the days after 9/11. Please join me in welcoming Brigadier General Scott Vander Hamm.
I don't have any PowerPoint presentations, and it's amazing how well these things come off when the comments aren't choreographed, i.e., I didn't know what Chad was going to say, I didn't know what Deb was going to say, but I'm going to take you, I've got some prepared comments, and I'm going to walk you through some of the things that happened on 9/11, and I'm going to take you beyond 9/11. I'll take you to where we are today, and then what the men and women are doing today. And I think you'll leave here with a great appreciation. Some of you writers will be inspired, not by necessarily pictures, but you'll be inspired to write about our future post 9/11, post the 10th anniversary of 9/11. So let me give you some prepared comments, because it took me a while to put these together. I don't want to miss anything. I want to tell you a good story, and then I'm going to talk to you about some personal stories as well. So it is a great honor to be here. Since I left a little over 2 years ago, a lot of things have changed, but what hasn't changed is the perseverance of the men and women in uniform. So as we prepare to remember tomorrow, the 10th anniversary, and what happened in New York, and what happened in Pennsylvania, and at the Pentagon, some would say it's a cliche to say that everything changed on 9/11, but that doesn't make it any less true. The world before that day was different, and we were different. All of us remember where we were that day. It's to us like it was to our parents of the assassination of John F. Kennedy. They know exactly where they were when that happened. And except for maybe the youngest, who probably wasn't born on 9/11, and some of these other young ones, we all know where we were when we at least found out the news, and then we're glued to the television watching these events unfold. Those moments are etched forever in our memories. It's also an event that shaped us, and I want to emphasize that with a quick story about one of my airmen. Airman First Class Brittany Brown. She was born in July of 1983. 3 weeks ago, she reported to my base, Whiteman Air Force Base, as a member of my Security Forces Squad. As of Thursday, she was the youngest uniformed member serving at Whiteman Air Force Base. Airman Brown was just over 8 years old when the plane struck the World Trade Towers. She was in her 3rd grade classroom in Shubansi Elementary School in Chicago. As she recalled, the teachers weren't anywhere around, and everything was crazy, in her own words. It wasn't until she got home that she found out something bad had happened. She was too young to understand at 8 years of age what happened or why, but that event has shaped virtually every moment of her life since. She later said that her decision to join the Air Force was because she wanted to help keep America safe. As of this summer, 38% of the Air Force is under the age of 26, and that percentage is higher for our Marines and some of our other services that after one term, they depart the service. But nearly 40% of my service is under that age. These airmen were learning how to drive cars when the terrorists attacked. It's hard for us in this room to imagine, and I don't want to embarrass anyone else by mentioning their age, but I was already in the military for 15 years when September 11th took place. I too, like Deb, was serving at the Pentagon. My office was in the National Military Command Center. And I'm going to tell you a real quick story about some events that took place there, not because I saw them firsthand, because I was actually out of the Pentagon when the plane struck. We have this thing called temporary duty. Sometimes military members, they'll be, for Navy and Marines, it's TAD. Sometimes they're temporarily assigned to another location. And I was out at Beale Air Force Base in California watching a nuclear generation and dispersal. Because many don't know, during this attack, we were doing a global Guardian exercise led by United States Strategic Command, and all of the bombers had mated nuclear weapons to them, and they were on nuclear alert. So in addition to those serving as a national deterrent, the intercontinental ballistic missiles are submarine-launched ballistic missiles, which are a survivable arm of the nuclear triad. The bombers were generated and ready to go. So I was out at Beale, charged by the J3, I worked for a lieutenant general, to watch the operations out there. And I'm in my room at Beale Air Force Base with the news on, getting my uniform on, ready to go. It's 5:30, 5:45 in the morning, and watching the news, and all of a sudden they report the first strike. So I watched this, and I said, I know in my heart. I knew after the first one that it was an attack. I didn't have to wait for the second. Because those of us that are airmen know that on a blue sky, visual flight rules, VFR day, planes don't just fly into towers unless it's driven into it. I mean, I'll tell you, some of us that fly airplanes, I see a couple other guys out here, even if you're in a simulator, if I were to put you in my simulator at Whiteman Air Force Base or the one I used to have at Ellsworth, and I told you, okay, here's your B1, I want you to hit that control tower over there, you would not be able to do it. You're moving so fast, it takes skill to hit that big stationary object when you're moving. I knew we were under attack. I immediately called my wife, Beth, the first, and woke her up. And I think I had 8 kids at the time. And I said, turn on the news. And so this played out for her as she's watching it and I'm watching it. And I changed from doing this TDY to thinking, how am I going to get home? You're very fortunate. We are fortunate as a nation that the Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dick Myers, an Air Force 4-star, was called down into the National Military Command Center, and he made a split-second decision in a national event conference. And that is a conference of people that are all on the telephone, on this special telephone called the Defense Red Switch Network, and listening about the events unfold. And he said, have FAA ground all aircraft. Meaning that if you're in an airplane, you're taxiing an airplane, you're about to take off, all of your clearances are immediately canceled. And as we know now, many years later, that there were many other attacks that could have happened, and they were thwarted because those people couldn't get off the ground. And they just kind of like roaches went back into society. We didn't know. But there were a number of other targets across our nation, and this terror attack was supposed to unfold on the East Coast, across the Midwest, to certain targets in maybe Houston, possibly Chicago, possibly Seattle. These significant signs of who we are as America. But General Myers, in that split-second decision, thwarted that from happening. So as these events began to unfold, we were very fortunate that we had the leaders that we did at the time, and the decisions made in crisis were crucial. And I think you'll see that when you replay a president being told while sitting in front of little school children, and then the events that take place, you can be proud that you're of a nation that has a very strong fabric. And this attack on our nation, though it has changed us, it's changed us in a way that will not keep us down. So General Myers grounded aircraft, the status of forces, I told you we were generated. These combat air patrols that we have today, these air forces and Navy airplanes that are on a strip alert to come up and defend critical infrastructure, they were not around at the time. We didn't think we had to protect New York City, Washington, D.C. Those were things that we were doing overseas, in Southern Watch, in Northern Watch, over different countries. Didn't think we had to do that here. We're different today, and we do that now. So there were a lot of heroes 343 firemen from the New York died that day. 23 police officers from the New York Police Department died. 27 from the Port Authority died, and many others that Chad Swilkin talked about at the beginning. In the Pentagon, when American Airlines Flight 77 struck, United Airlines Flight 93, which could have struck any target in the DC area, that too was thwarted by some very brave people. And it gives me great faith that when hearing about it, the others, due to fear and or terror of seeing maybe we don't know, but seeing maybe a flight attendant or a passenger with their throat slit, something of that nature could have happened, to just freeze them. I don't want to do anything right now. Don't know what's going on. Let's just comply. Let's see how this plays out. Not knowing that they were part of a suicide mission to attack our infrastructure. But that's not what Todd Beamer did, and that's not what the men and women on United Airlines Flight 93 did, because they stormed the front cockpit. They did not allow that plane to be used as a weapon. And they all perished in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. So, our president, what does he say? He came on TV shortly after that, said, we're going to hunt down and we're going to punish those responsible for these cowardly acts. And then he went on later to say that none will ever forget this day. And it's through events like this that we remember. It's events like this when we tell our stories that we remember that it did happen. There were eyewitness accounts that it happened. There's some today that would believe that the Holocaust is made up. And we look at them and just shake our heads and wonder, what are you doing? What are you smoking? You know, what is it that makes you who you are? We have pictures. We have testimonies of people. We have people that have been branded that were there. That did happen. 9/11 happened as well. And the attacks on us do not need to be forgotten. The month after those attacks, I was stationed with Deb in the J3. About a year later, or less than a year later, I was in command of a B-2 squadron. But only 1 month after the attack of 9/11, B-2s, and it was already alluded to the fact that B-1s began to deploy, and they went to places in the Middle East, Thumray, Diego Garcia, and they began our response in Afghanistan against people who were harboring the training of these people. The B-2s took off out of Whiteman Air Force Base and flew a 44-hour combat mission. They flew over the Pacific. They flew through the Straits of Malacca, around India, up over Pakistan into Afghanistan, dropped their ordnance, recovered the Diego Garcia, which is a British Indian Ocean Territory island south of the equator in the Indian Ocean. They didn't even shut down engines. They changed out the crew, serviced the oil, which you can do on a B-2 while engines are running, took back off and came all the way back to Whiteman Air Force Base. So they flew for 75 hours. But on the ramp at Diego were B-1s from Ellsworth Air Force Base, were B-52s from Barksdale Air Force Base, and they had already started after that first strike and launching sorties into and after those training camps in Afghanistan. That was the beginning of what we now know today as Operation Enduring Freedom. We've been in Afghanistan now for almost 10 years. The Air Force has been in the Middle East since Desert Storm. So put things in perspective. World War II, from 7 December 1941 till VE Day and VJ Day, shortly after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, of which my wing was the only wing ever to drop nuclear weapons. Then it was called the 509th Composite Group, now the 509th Bomb Wing. But that was a span of less than 4 years. And those that served in the Army, we probably have some veterans today from World War II. If you served, would you raise your hand in one of those conflicts in World War II? We are so thankful for this, the greatest generation. We've got many that have served from World War II and then into Korea, Vietnam, and other conflicts throughout the ages. But they'll know that when these men and women came back, a lot of them didn't tell their stories. They saw some pretty bad things, some pretty atrocious things. And I know that my grandfather, he didn't talk about what he saw in World War II until he got older in years. Then he began to open up and tell those stories. The young men today and women today that are serving, they're going maybe not for that 3 years, and they're not maybe gone for 3.5 years, but they have been overseas 4, 5, and 6 times on these deployments to these places in Afghanistan and Iraq, to Kuwait, to Qatar, to Thumray, to other garden spots in the world. And they are forever changed by these deployments. So that October 2001 first strike, which is still going on today, then reminds me of what has happened since then. And I'm just going to walk you through some of my experience since 2001, 9/11, and share with you how it's changed me. And I think you'll see some threads for your loved ones, people that you know that have served, and the stories that they tell. In 2 years after, maybe a year and a half after, as we started to piece together the culprits of this, and this Al-Qaeda network started to become known, and the president said, we're going to hunt down and destroy, we're going to hunt down and punish those responsible. That led us into what is known today as Operation Iraqi Freedom, now called New Dawn. Iraqi Freedom started in March 2003, and it was started, the doors were open to that strike in a campaign called Shock and Awe. If you remember the images of the Tigris and Euphrates River in Baghdad and saw explosions going on in and around that, I was the first aircraft to cross that from Whiteman Air Force Base. I led a 3-ship of B-2 bombers, and we had B-2s flying out of Diego Garcia, so 6 B-2s met up in the skies over Iraq with F-117 fighters, and we dropped our ordnance, 2,000 and 5,000 pound munitions, to try and take out that leadership or those responsible, Saddam, Hussein, and Uday. Saddam finally got his justice through the court system in Iraq, and then the sons, they were both killed in a raid. But we were trying to find them, and we flew 38 hours that first night from Missouri all the way back and landed in Missouri with 5 air refuelings. And that started about a 2 or 3 week churn as B-2s began to open the door for other non-stealthy aircraft to have freedom of access and freedom of maneuver, and that allowed then our Army soldiers and Marines to have freedom of access. Because if those of those that have served in World War II know that it's no fun to be maneuvering on the ground knowing that you're not safe up above. If you can't guarantee that I'm not going to get hit by an artillery shell or some airplane dive bombing on me, nobody likes that. So we wanted to ensure that the skies were free so that they had freedom of maneuver on the ground. So B-2s flew a number of missions. B-1s began to fly, both from here and from Dyess Air Force Base. They forward deployed to locations in the Middle East. Then we jump forward now, about 3 years after that. I left command of a squadron. I got to go to a Secretary of Defense fellowship, and then I immediately took command of a B-1 group at Dyess Air Force Base. And it was during that time at Dyess Air Force Base that I deployed to be the 40th Air Expeditionary Group Commander at Diego Garcia. First time for me to be on this island flying missions into Afghanistan. And it was while there that we split the force of B-1s, and we put 4 B-1s where they currently are deployed to Al Udeid Air Base, and we left 4 at Diego, and we did split operations. The ones at Al Udeid could fly into Iraq and Afghanistan at a much lesser sortie duration, and those flying from Diego Garcia were flying all the way into Afghanistan to effect a combat air patrol, if you will, to support the missions going on. So when we had troops in contact, whether they were Army or Marines, and they knew they had air cover, B-1 or something like it, they knew that if they got in trouble, that fire would fall from heaven and schwack, the bad guys would go away. That's a technical term. Like, it's kind of like the Elijah concept. You just call God, take away this, and and he's right over there. Get him. Wow. Those B-1s provide that day in and day out. The B-1s moved off of Diego at a great savings to taxpayers by shutting down the B-1 operation at Diego and moving our B-1s all to Al Udeid Air Base, though it's very painful for those at Ellsworth and Dias right now. It saves us as taxpayers about $150 million every year. And we don't have tanker costs, the base operating costs out of Diego. It gives greater coverage to the warfighter at a lesser expense to us as taxpayers. But they do it day in and day out. The B-1 since 2006 have been in that fight. So those of you here at Ellsworth or in the surrounding parts of Ellsworth, Rapid City and surrounding communities, your support to that mission is huge. And it's not just to the ones in the fight, it's to the families. Their resiliency is only because of the foundation they have at home. So when you are in a restaurant or you see a mother with 3 small children and struggling, and you say a word of encouragement, you buy them a meal at a restaurant, you see their grass is a little bit too long, so you mow their yard. That kind of stuff goes a long way in helping those families deal with the fact that dad is not there. Sorry. When we pushed from the east to the west across this great nation, and we came up against threats to our families, usually dad was always there, remember? The deterrent was his shotgun or his long rifle, and with that, little kids felt secure, and their happiness was not measured on what they had, their Game Boy, their Wii, or whatever else it is. It was measured by something else. It was measured by family, having a meal, having freedom and liberty, those types of things. Now, when dads and moms are gone, that impacts the families here at home. So we're a different nation because we have a generation now, which I call the newest greatest, the new greatest generation. And that's these young men and women that have raised their right hand, that 40% of my Air Force and more for the Army and the Marine Corps and the Navy, that have raised their right hands to take an oath to defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and they're doing it when they know they're going to go downrange. We are a different nation. We're a better nation than we were then. Just recently, coming back then, after serving again with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Mike Mullen was my boss, and that's the whole reason I'm wearing this rank. It's not because of anything I did, just because I had a boss that said, hey, Andy, he's got 11 kids, let's promote him. He needs money to send them all to college, right, Kusai? I don't know how that works, but I got promoted. And then I had the privilege, after being confirmed by the Senate, to get to go to Whiteman Air Force Base again and be the commander there. Well, it just so happens the first time I was at Whiteman, I flew an Operation Allied Force against Milosevic. The second time I was at Whiteman, I led the strikes in Iraqi freedom. And then I went to the B-1s and ended up in combat in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I come back to Whiteman, and now, months after taking command at Whiteman, I get a phone call, hey, we need B-2s for night 1 of Operation Odyssey Dawn. Of course, then Ellsworth followed on with strikes as well. So I don't know if somebody's following my career, but they're watching where I'm going to go next, because if that's a combat unit, there's a good chance that they're going to be defending the great values of our nation. And so Odyssey Dawn is now called Unified Protector. That continues in Libya as we support NATO and their operations there, and I believe soon that will come to an end as they begin to encircle and find out where that dictator is hiding. So I'm here in paradise with you, as Pastor Wells would call Rapid City, another day in paradise, to share with you those short memories. In conclusion, the full story, I believe, of how 9/11 has changed us is not yet written. The Black Hills Veterans Writers Group can be a part of that. It will be many years before we as a nation, I think, can look back at that warm September day and its consequences and fully understand how it has shaped us. I have seen young Americans, like Airman Brown, who were so young when 9/11 occurred that they barely understood what was happening. Their dedication and willingness to serve reminds me that America is a stronger nation today than it was a decade ago. Adversity has made us stronger. So as we gather as a nation to remember September 11th, 2001, tomorrow, we remember those who lost their lives that day, and then in the fighting that has followed. We remember our men and women in harm's way, today fighting the extremists, as Milton Friedman would call them, Islamic terrorists who plan and execute terrorist attacks. We as an Air Force, an Army, a Marine Corps, a Navy, and a Coast Guard, and as a nation must remain resilient, dedicated to protecting our great nation and our citizens. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to our moderator. And as Deb stated, Deb and I will stay as long as you like if you have questions. And if you'd like to do questions together, we can come up, or Chad can come up as well, and we can take any questions from the floor. So I don't know what the agenda has.